And welcome back to Janky AF. Now, if you saw my last video, you will have seen that I have since departed from my beloved, iconic, whimsical 2012 Ford Transit Connect. It's a long story, you can go watch that. Now I have to find a replacement for that vehicle, and I am choosing between what would on paper be two diametrically opposed vehicles, that being a Ford Excursion and a Toyota Prius, specifically a Toyota Prius V, the station wagon variant. These look like very, very different cars, both of which are probably not used often as work vehicles, quite honestly, because the Excursion was more of sort of an SUV passenger type vehicle, even though it's based on a truck platform. And a Prius, obviously, also not often used for a work vehicle. How are you going to carry ladders? It's more of a pedestrian, high mileage commuter or passenger vehicle generally. So not only, and maybe that's their first similarity, is that they are a little bit of oddball work vehicle choices. And what I hope to do in this video is show you just how tough my decision was. Now, in truth and full disclosure, I have made this decision already, so if you know what I got already, please don't spill the beans. So the Ford Excursion, let's start there. The Ford Excursion, and another similarity, was made from 2000 to 2006. The Toyota Prius V was made from 2012 to 2017. So just about 6-7 year range for both of those vehicles. So that gives you maybe, you're going to have like a similar number of cars to choose from. I think they were both fairly popular cars, although not massive volume cars, because, the Excursion and the Prius V specifically were both kind of like niche vehicles. I love the Excursion. I've always loved the Excursion. I heard once that it was the largest mass-produced consumer SUV ever made, like dimensionally. I hope that's true. It reminds me of the Canyonero in The Simpsons, sort of just a larger-than-life, if you will, vehicle. I just love that Ford has this, Escape, Explorer, Expedition, and they had to take it one further and do this giant Excursion. It's basically a pickup truck that they turned into an SUV at the factory, and it is a very, very unique vehicle in the automotive landscape. Now, these have gotten a bit of a following, I would say. Tyler Hoover bought one, the 7.3 specifically, which I am looking for, and the Prius V has also gotten, I would say, a bit of a not collector market for it, but I think people are starting to realize that a hatchback Prius, a lot of people didn't even know they made them, and a hatchback Prius was sort of a really, really good idea. It's strange that it didn't come sooner, and it's strange that it didn't last as long. Now, technically, the normal Prius was a hatchback, but it was not a station wagon per se. One of the reasons why the Prius V went away was because they introduced the RAV4 Hybrid, and when that came out onto the market, it sold really, really well. Obviously, people want SUVs rather than station wagons in this day and age, and so the Prius V kind of went by the wayside. So let's talk about my parameters very, very specifically. Now, with the Excursion, I do want to do the 7.3 liter for two reasons. One, I want a diesel engine, and two, I've heard not so great things about the 6 liter that came later. The 6 liter came over in mid-2003. So you're really only looking for 2000 to 2003 Excursions. And then, so I'm looking on Car Gurus specifically, and you can't really filter out by engine type. So you have to do 2000, 2003, and then you have to just hope that the one you really fall in love with has a 7.3 in it, which you can find out later in the listing. But a fairly small sample size. Now, concurrently, in the Prius V, I am looking for only 2015 to 2017. I did a ton of research upon making my decision on both vehicles, and in the Prius Vs, I found that pre-2015 there was not a fan there was not a filter on the fan that cooled the hybrid battery, so that caused problems. Also, I believe that Toyota was telling people that they only had to change their oil every 10,000 miles, and I believe that led to some head gasket issues. I'm sure there's more out there, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but those, to me, were the major issues that I found, so I've limited the search to 2015 to 2017. With the Excursion, I'm doing 250,000 miles and under, because it is a diesel engine. It tends to run a bit longer, and I just thought that was a good range for the price point. With the Prius V, I'm doing 150,000 miles and under. Now, I probably could even bump that up because Prius Vs, they're New York taxis. You see them with over 400,000 miles on them, and the battery length is how long the hybrid battery is going to last you is a point of contention. But there are certainly people with 200,000 miles or above that are still on the original battery. If they're maintained well, they really do hold up. So the mileage is slightly different on the two, just accounting for the diesel. And while we're talking about the diesel, I guess I should talk about my intent for these two vehicles. A big caveat or stipulation in the Excursion that would be sort of a work vehicle is that I would convert it to run on waste vegetable oil. So that is a sticking point for me. And now already here you can see how it kind of ties in with the Prius V, because obviously both these cars are about economy first and foremost. It's a work vehicle. I drive it a lot. And I cover a lot of distance, and especially with gas prices what they are, I want something that is going to cost me as little as possible to run while still being an effective work vehicle. So the Excursion, if you know, you can Google tons of stuff about waste vegetable oil conversion. I would do a full waste vegetable oil. I would not run biodiesel. You can get all the reasons and go into more detail on that, but I would want to actually get the vegetable oil, refine it, and filter it myself, which I've also done research into, and then run a 2-tank system. So you have one tank that holds your vegetable oil. You have a heater in the engine bay that heats up your oil to temperature, and once it reaches 160 degrees, I believe it is, you can flip a switch and you flip over. And then there's differing opinions on your return, whether you should run it straight into the tank or run it into a separate tank that would re-enter into the engine, just like all diesel engines do. I won't get too into the specifics, but it is something I'm very, very interested in. So that would be the Excursion plan. So you'd get the 7.3 liter, you'd convert it to waste vegetable oil. Now, obviously, in addition to the price, that's also going to come with the conversion cost. And the veggie oil, I still think you can get for free, even though in some larger areas there is a market for it now. We're actually paying for it, but still obviously much, much cheaper than diesel. The Prius kind of speaks for itself. Now, the only question with the Prius that's going to be difficult is hauling ladders. Now, I've done a lot of research on this subject. I've gone through all the forums and everything. Some people were strangely pessimistic on these forums about hauling, saying Priuses shouldn't be work vehicles, blah, blah, blah. But I also found a couple answers of people hauling kayaks and everything. Basically, you just have to get a roof rack for the Prius, which you can find, a ski rack, whatever. And then if you wanted to be extra safe, you could get a tow hitch and then a little T-bar that shoots up at the end that would add extra length. So in theory, that would actually be a much longer span than my Transit was, and it would be perfectly fine for carrying ladders of almost any length. I would rip the back 2 seats out of the Prius as well. And I've gone on forums and researched about this. And once you remove those 2 back seats, you can actually create a 6-foot long platform. People use them as camping vehicles. And 6 feet is actually, I believe, a tiny bit longer of length than I had in the Transit. With the bulkhead in the back, it actually wasn't that long. Now, it won't be as high, but I don't carry a lot of really, really tall stuff. I have many little bags of tools and stuff like that, but I don't carry a lot of things that are really tall. So I don't think that would really, handicap me that much. The Excursion, hauling stuff, no problem. You can put ladder racks on it. You can carry a million pieces of payload, 4x8 sheets of plywood. In addition, the other thing the Excursion would have is I would only get one that's 4-wheel drive as well. I would not get a 2-wheel drive one. And you could potentially plow with this vehicle. Now, that may not be a great use of your investment, just because plow trucks tend to get beat up. But obviously, you're fine in the winter. You have tons of capability. And the other thing is I could tow with this vehicle, which I could not do with the Prius. So if it means buying lots of janky cars and stuff like that down the road and not having to like borrow a trailer or rent one or, ask a favor from your Uncle Gary. So that would be an extra practical purpose that would be built into the Excursion. So it really is a tough choice because, the Prius, obviously you're getting 42, 44 miles to the gallon just on pump gas. And now, and this gets into the market for these vehicles, and we'll get into the prices in a second. $5 a gallon where I am in upstate New York here for gas. Maybe it's creeping a tiny bit lower in some places, 490, something like that. Diesel is more than gas, which is funny because diesel always used to, way back in the day, diesel was cheaper because I believe it's a slightly easier to refine than gasoline. Correct me if I'm wrong out there. Now the price of diesel is like up over $6 a gallon. So the mileage savings is not really, if you're driving like a diesel Jetta or something like that, you got to figure, the extra price versus the extra mileage, it's probably kind of like a push at this point. But of course, that's kind of irrelevant for our terms because I'm going to be converting this thing to waste vegetable oil anyways. So the price of diesel actually really doesn't matter to me, which is funny. But from a market standpoint, obviously, now I haven't been tracking things. I'm not, have the massive amounts of like data and the ability to sort of go through it like someone like a Doug DeMuro, and I appreciate that he's so thorough and stuff like that. But we're just going to do a quick search here. But it's funny because just where I could go with this is I'm sure Priuses are probably hot right now because of gasoline. But with diesel trucks, I feel like you get to a point where the price of diesel gets so expensive, and especially for trucks, which are not like a car where your gas savings are that significant. Nobody's going to be getting 40 miles a gallon in a diesel truck. So I'm wondering if that's actually driving the price of really gargantuan diesel vehicles down. I would be very interested to know at what point the price of diesel gets so high that the market for these trucks actually goes down. While the market for stuff like hybrids goes up. It's a very interesting, it's the same gas and diesel prices are rising, but it could have different effects on each of those things. So just a curious little thing in there. Okay, so let's get to pricing. And this is where it gets really interesting too, because as you'll see, in these wildly different vehicles, they're not so far apart. So I'm setting my budget at $17,000. That's assuming I will get a decent value for the Transit and trade. And actually just looking on Facebook Marketplace for comps for my Transit, I was actually surprised at how much they were going for. Sometimes as much as like $7,000 or $8,000 with comparable mileage. Now, if you've watched my other videos, my Transit has some issues, so I can't really command that. But say it's going to be around $4,000 to $5,000, something like that. Really good for, it's been paid off. I only paid $11,000 for it to begin with. So, for beating that vehicle up and it being a solid workhorse, even if I get 50% of the value back of it over, 5 years or something like that, I think for a vehicle like that, that's pretty good. So we're calling our budget $17,000. With the Excursion, we're going to say 250,000 miles or less. And with the Prius, we're going to say also $17,000. And we're going to say 150,000 miles or less. Prius years, we're going to say 2015 to 2017, so 3 model years. And Ford Excursion, we're going to say 2000 to 2003. So 4 model years, but half of those 2003s are going to be the 6.0 liter. So again, it's funny how these things line up with these. I've made this like sort of crazy, two polar opposites to make my decision, but the more I get into it, the closer they become to each other, and actually the harder the decision gets. When we talked about the plans for these vehicles, obviously a veggie oil conversion is going to be a little bit more expensive than slapping some roof racks on the Prius. Then again, a tow hitch and a T-bar like that's going to be, you're calling it, maybe you're in for a little over $1,000 with all those accessories. The Excursion, you got to figure you're going to be in at $2,000 to $3,000, and then you're going to have to buy some materials to process the oil too. But in theory, you're not really buying any fuel per se. So that's another little mathematical equation that you'd have to factor over time. I would imagine the maintenance on the Excursion is going to be a little bit more generally. It's an older vehicle. Trucks, just everything about them, brakes, tires, everything is more expensive than on a passenger vehicle. So your Excursion is going to be a little bit more, your expenses are going to be a little bit more, but then you have the added utility of being able to tow. So all these things make for a very, very interesting decision. In the Excursion, I see a couple. Now, again, there's not a ton of choices. A lot of these are no price listed, so I can go on the private classifieds and look. But just for the sake of buying this for the dealer, we're probably going to finance some of it. Not that you can't finance in private party sales, but I digress. So I think the best one I found here that kind of like, just looking at this initially, meets all my qualifications. This is in Maryville, Tennessee. We have a 2001. And by the way, I'm willing to go anywhere in the country to get this car if it's the right one, because, you know, assuming the plane will actually take me to where I want to go. Maybe I'll take the train. It's an excuse to take a trip. It's an excuse to make content, yada, 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 and to find the right vehicle. And also with these big trucks that are, you know, getting to be 20 years old now, it's probably a good idea to find one in the South that's probably got a better chance of the undercarriage being in decent shape. So this is a beautiful 2001 Ford Excursion Limited 4-wheel drive. It's listed for $16,499. This beautiful green over tan combination. I love this grille style. Look at this, just massive. I love these big wheels with like a million lug nuts in them. This looks to be in really, really good condition. Now, I've read a lot of buyer's guides and stuff, and one thing they say that seems really, really obvious, but I think it's kind of important, especially when you're thinking about a work vehicle, is they're like, don't try to get the right color with the right interior options and like all exactly perfectly what you want, because chances are you might end up making an aesthetic decision that actually compromises, you know, like a mechanical one. Like, you would just want to find the best vehicle, the one that's in the best condition that matches your price and mileage qualifications. And you learn to love it, you know, like I really like this green, you know. It'd be cool to get one in white, either one of these, because it's going to be a work vehicle and it's kind of a standard color. Or if I get something really funky, something that had a pre-existing wrap on it, that's what I did with the Transit. But, you know, I think really, you can always paint it. I mean, I've painted plenty of cars, and that's something that can be easily remedied. So I love the rear barn doors on these Excursions. I think that's like a nice feature. I think the glass flips up and the barn doors open. I would take the rear seats out of these too, at least the bench seats, because if you take the third row out, then you still have tons of space and you can fit 4 people in it. And if you need a lot of space, you take the both sets of rear seats out of it, and then you just got a super tough workhorse. Now, I've always been a little bit of a Ford guy. Of course, I am the Aerostar, you know, obsessed type. And something about Fords. Now, I will say, as an aside, I really like a big Corvette guy. I'm much more of a Corvette guy than a Mustang guy. But other than that, I lean pretty heavy towards Ford. See if we can get some interior shots for you here without boring you too much. There is that beautiful 7.3 liter Power Stroke. I've heard it is a fairly good candidate for veg oil conversion too. Now, I can't remember the specifics of the internals and the engine and where different parts are located, but I've heard through various forums and resources that it is a good candidate. And if you are going to veggie convert a car, I would be very specific with what engine you pick, because with these common rail systems and your fuel injection systems, generally better, the older the better in some cases. But you do want to sort of do your research on what exactly diesel engine you're going to convert, because some are going to be much more prone to give you problems down the road. Now, the other thing I like about the Excursions, and this is where the Prius and the Excursion are similar, they were more really passenger vehicles than work vehicles, as maybe I've said. I mean, the Excursion, yes, it's a truck, but it was like a luxury thing. It was meant for like hockey moms and stuff like that. Like, it was sort of this like the Canyonero from The Simpsons. Like, it was just, and I think this may even be an Eddie Bauer edition. I wish they'd give us more pictures of the interior. Oh well, but it looks like it's loaded with the leather and everything. You got a two-tone tan over like a lighter tan, or maybe even it's got a little bit of olive green in it to match the exterior, wood trim. Beautiful, beautiful vehicle. So there you go, $16,499. Now let's go to our Toyota, and that's 229,000 miles, 3-owner vehicle. So $239K, and it's $16,499. Both just under our parameters of $250,000 and $17,000 respectively. Toyota Prius V, okay, 2015 and 2017. Again, we're selecting a shorter range of years, only 3 model years, because of our qualifications. We want to go 2015 up due to some maintenance issues. Boy, not a lot of options. Just like the Excursion, very few options. All right, how about this? We got a 2016 Toyota Prius V for $16,990. And they say it's actually overpriced. This one has 156,000 on it, so just above our no accidents, clean title. So that's what I'm going for. So, okay, 16,990. What was the Excursion? 16,499. Almost identical, and we're both at our just around our mileage thresholds. Now again, I really think these Prius Vs, 58 city, 53 highway, that sounds a little higher than I've been told, but it doesn't look like a lot, but when you see pictures of the rear bench seats taken out, you can fit a ton of stuff in here. And the nice thing about this is you're just driving and going. You're not installing a different fuel system, all that. You chuck a roof rack on it. And with my Transit getting basically 22, maybe 23 miles to the gallon, if you're getting 50 in this or close to 50, you're more than or almost cutting your mileage, doubling your mileage, cutting your gas bill in half, like driving it off the lot. So, very, very different options, but in a lot of ways, both serve the same utility. And that's kind of what I want to do with this video is just, one, I thought it was hilarious that I'm making this decision. But I think that sometimes you just got to think outside the box and what might be the right vehicle for you. And, dream up and work up a scenario of how you might best use this vehicle and how you might get the most out of its utility, and how there are still deals and bargains to be out there if you think about it, and try to find the right solution for what you need. So that was another wonderful rambling janky AF sort of brain fart. And if you enjoyed it, janky do thanky. This is Janky AF, and until next time, janky do thanky.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.